Tenon mountings are very popular for gripping on a chuck, but recess mountings have their times when they're actually stronger, and there are far less problems in mounting on a recess than it can be on a tenon. In fact, a recess can actually be slightly wrong and still be forgiving. However, it still has to be able to grip without the piece coming off the lathe. So we're going to go through all the problems that people have when they're creating the recess. And here we can see a whole series of pieces, and only 2 of these are actually perfect recesses. Keeping in mind, you can make quite a number of errors. Some of these you can live with, some of them you can't. I've cut a series of pieces in half so we can clearly see the kind of fit that we have with a recess. This is the full recess here, and this is what I classify as a perfect recess. What I have is a matching tenon angle and then a very slight undercut here. And that's giving contact right on the very edge, which gives it the best support. It's important that it's cut clean, there's no torn grain in here. Therefore, when we expand, we've got a really good fit, and we can see no problems with this tenon at all. And it's also not too deep. If we go too deep, you'll see that this actual jaw system becomes straight and we'd be gripping on the wrong part of the jaw. We can see these jaws have the ability of having a much longer tenon than they do a recess. If the recess was full length, it'd be riding on a parallel section and it wouldn't be gripping very well. If you want to make the recess more shallow, you can see I have one here that would be successful. I'd have to take lighter cuts, otherwise it's going to have the potential of coming off the lathe. We still have a dovetail. And I do have a slight concave surface here. And the reason for the slight concave surface is so I'm gripping on the very edge. You could go for almost perfectly flat, but in this case you couldn't go for domed because the domed would give you even less grip. And this would be an acceptable grip as long as the cuts were light. This particular recess doesn't have a dovetail. In fact, the taper is in the wrong direction, not matching the jaws at all. This particular one would fail. It could possibly even fail before I started the cut, just with the revolutions and the weight of the piece. It is essential that the dovetail somewhat matches the shape. It doesn't have to be exact, but this is the worst form of recess here. So even though we have contact on the face right here and here, it wouldn't be sufficient. And even if I crush the jaws way out to try and force them in, I'm doubting that it would actually grip enough, and this piece would probably go airborne. I've swapped the block around, and this recess is still defective. It's not likely to hold any wood put under a lot of stress from cutting. Possibly if the piece is heavy, it would still come off the lathe. This is because the cut in was almost square, so there's no dovetail action. And even though we do have good contact on the outer rim, it's not going to be sufficient. It's certainly a lot better than tapered the wrong way, but still, I wouldn't trust this. We do need to see some recess in there. You might get away with it with compression. If you keep winding it out, the very edge of these jaws may grip into that. But for these dovetail jaws, I wouldn't risk it. On this side, I have a correctly cut recess, deep enough to support the piece, and plenty of wood support around the outside. On this side, the recess is cut correctly, but it's not particularly deep, and there's very little support here. So if I was to grip to turn a fairly large piece on this, or took an aggressive cut, then there's a potential of it breaking. I'm actually going to demonstrate in the chuck that if I over tighten the chuck, this wood won't be able to support it, and it will break right here on the end grain area, here and here. I'm going to put this side in because it's much stronger. I'm going to tighten the chuck as much as I can. Let's see if we have any effects on it. So I've given it a really good tighten, and we didn't hear any wood crack. It took the stress. So here you can see when you're doing a recess, it's important to have a lot of wall thickness around the jaw mounting. So let's reverse it and see what we get when we over tighten on the opposite side. Before I actually tighten this piece, we have 2 problems. One is that the jaws have been expanded beyond their optimum diameter, so I've got pressure just in a small area here, and obviously on each of the 4 jaws. And here I've actually lined it up with the end grain, so I'm definitely going to get a burst of the wood as I over tighten here. So let's tighten it up with a good pinch and see what happens. And there we can clearly see it failed right on the very end grain. It's bursted right out on this side, and yep, the same on the other side. So if we were to try and turn like this, the piece is definitely coming off the lathe. On this particular recess, we have the problem that the dovetail doesn't match the jaws, but it matches in the opposite direction to what we'd actually want. What we have here is it's gripping on the very outer edge here of the wood. So it's going to compress this, and we're not going to get the grip at the front. Now we do have location at the front, so it would run accurately, but this particular type of grip is the type that has the potential of actually pulling this piece of wood loose and splitting it. So I don't recommend to have the dovetail too dovetailed. In fact, I'd rather it was slightly straighter and touching at the front rather than touching at the back. The problem with the recess that is formed here, it's too deep. Because the dovetail only comes back so far, and this is straight here, I'm actually gripping on the very outer edge, similar to the problem I had on this side, except I'm actually on a straight part, so it has the potential to slide forwards on that because we have no contact on any part of the dovetail. We do have location, so it would look like it's running true, but if we're taking any heavy cuts or just general work, I have a feeling that this would slide forwards, and that would create as a big problem. If your dovetail jaws go all the way back at an angle, that wouldn't be an issue, but most modern jaws have this straight section on the outer part here. I've cut 2 recesses in this particular piece. Here we have one with a very clean corner that's going to mount and be secure on the lathe. This one, defective corner, and this is very common. Most people don't realize that when they cut in, they leave a little bit of waste. It could even just be dust. In this case, it's actually solid wood. The corner wasn't cut clean, so it looks like at this stage, as I've pinched it up, I actually still have location on the face, and then I have a little bit of grip to the side. But that's going to change. When I tighten it up, usually it will slip backwards, and usually it doesn't stay square to the chuck. It'll pull one way or the other. However, whichever way it goes onto the lathe, it's not going to be satisfactory. If it stays in this position, I'm gripping with a tiny amount here and no support to the side. I do have location, and if I over tighten or as I'm just tightening up, it just twists a little bit. We end up with this result. The piece is slid forwards and created a gap between the front of the jaws and the wood. So now I have no location, not likely to be running true, and I've lost that lateral support. So it's going to want to twist or move or vibrate in the lathe. Even though I do have good surface contact on the outside, we need both the front and the side for it to be a secure chuck mounting. Here we have 2 opposite bases inside the dovetailed recess. We have concave and convexed. Here we've got a good grip right here and good location and accuracy because it's mounting right on the very outer edge here. No problems with this except for when you hollow out a bowl, you're much closer to going through the base here than you would be with a convex. So keep that in mind. If you do hollow it, you get a great grip, great location, but the risk of going through the base is greater. So here, when we have a convex base, it helps when we're hollowing out a piece. We're less likely to go through the base. The problem is I've reduced my grip strength. I'm gripping on the edge of the jaws, but there's a gap here, and I'm now resting on the inner diameter of the jaws. Not an ideal situation. Also, As I expand the jaws, they're going to mark and dig in here. So if this was wanted to be left as a finished feature later, it's going to have a groove in it and it's going to be distinguishable. So I wouldn't recommend this as a grip for a finish. This would need a recutting later and angling here to clean that up. I like a recess to grip a bowl. Because I'm push cutting around the outside of the bowl, I need access all the way around, and therefore if I have a tailstock there, it's going to create me some problems. This is a very strong grip for this type of mounting. However, I don't remove all of the middle because this is where the drive center was when I was forming this shape. I leave this piece in the middle. I've there got to make sure it doesn't interfere with the chuck mounting, and it's very easy for it to be touching inside the base and not knowing it's there, and therefore have a much weakened grip. Here I have a piece where I've left the centerpiece way too proud. I've not been paying attention, so when I put it in a chuck, we can clearly see if I was to expand my jaws, I would actually be resting on the base of the chuck and gripping a lot shallower than I realized. So let's see what it does. So because I won't be able to see through the jaws, they're blocking my vision, I'm presuming that I'm okay, but I'm not. I'm gripping half the depth I thought I was, and I'm resting on the bottom with no front jaw support. This is a very weak chuck mounting because without that jaw front support, it's going to rock and twist, and more than likely, if I'm taking an aggressive cut, it's probably going to come off the lathe. So got to pay attention to the waist in the middle, make sure it is below the surface of the base of the jaws. This jaw set was initially designed to grip about a 5-inch diameter. Here I have a recess, it's about 6.5, and this modern chuck can expand that far. The problem with the grip will be it'll be gripping on the very outer edge here only. We won't be getting full surface contact. However, this reset is cut correctly, so there's a good clean corner. It is undercut, and it will grip right on the very front here, so we're going to get good location. So let's see how far out it expands and see how it grips it. So the grip on this particular chuck system now is on the outer curve. If we look at the back here, we can see we don't have any contact here. The contact is just on the very outer part, nothing here and here. Now that would still be a stable grip on a chucking method as long as we have location at the front and we have a good matching recess angle. So I'd be okay to expand wider, especially if my jaws weren't very big and I wanted to turn a piece a little bigger than they're supposed to be designed for. This would be satisfactory, not ideal. However, it is definitely going to leave some marks permanently on the inside of the recess, so it wouldn't be able to be left as a decorative feature. You'd have to recut it afterwards to get rid of those indentations. Here we can see on this recess, it was cut with an aggressive cut and a dull tool. We have torn grain here. The face of it also is torn. And it's not that we couldn't use this as a recess. The problem is with torn grain, as we put it under compression by tightening the chuck, that torn grain will settle again. In other words, those fibers have parts of them missing. So as we put the pressure on, in about 5 to 10 minutes time, it'll actually compress enough to possibly become a little bit loose. I'm doubting that if it was cut the right angle, it would come off the lathe, but you're going to get additional vibration as you're creating the cuts. So ensure you sharpened your chisel to do that final cut and that we don't have a mess across the face so we get good location. Here with this mini chuck, the dovetail on the outside here is very short and then there's a long straight. And although this recess doesn't look excessively deep, it would be a problem with these jaws. If I place it in here and as I tighten up, the location of the taper is on the straight section. There's not a lot of gap there, but we're having location here. There may be some location here. However, if the location here isn't sound, then this is going to slide forward as I take cuts roughing the piece down. So keep in mind that if you do have a long straight and a short taper, then either you need to do a shorter recess or just remove a little bit of wood here when you're forming the recess. Just cut a little extra off so that the location is in the very corner, giving us a face contact as well. So here we can see I've squared it up. Now the piece was bandsawn, so it's not going to be perfect on both sides, but this is acceptable. Not yet biting on the teeth. Remember, this is a full-size lathe, so winding in with the tailstock is not a problem. Going to make sure I'm nice and tight. If you have a lathe with a movable headstock, make sure that's also tight because you could be pushing the headstock sideways. This has a fixed headstock, so it's not a problem. Several things I'm going to do to ensure that I stay safe. The revolutions will not be allowed to go above 1,000 because I'm only held between 2 points and the block of wood could be well imbalanced. We don't know at this stage how well it's going to run on the lathe. We do have good grip here, but if anything was to go wrong, at 1,000 revolutions, the blank will drop to the floor. Anything above 1,000 revolutions, and it can go airborne. Airborne means it could go in any direction, including towards me or possibly somebody else in the room. So I've set my true rest. I'm nice and tight. I've checked my revolutions because I have a readout, and I'm now able to face off the blank and put my recess in. I'm going to use two tools. I'm going to face off with a 40-40 bowl gouge, peeling away the surface so it becomes level, and then cutting a small amount of space out, allow me to get in with the scraper to create the undercut. I don't want to remove all of the center because I need waste wood there. That's where the pressure is for my tailstock. The second tool I'm using is a scraper. It is angled. It's actually a badan. Now, it's not a French badan, it is a trapezoid. So this particular tool actually is tapered from both directions. A French badan would actually be square, would not be a trapezoid. And I've converted it into a little scraper with a fairly dull angle here so that when I go in, it's not aggressive. I can undercut so my jaws can't slide out once they're in location. Using the appropriate size dovetail jaws, I'm measuring them out, and then I'm going to mark the surface of the wood. That way I can expand and not be too much beyond what they are when they form a circle. Using the little angled scraper, it's important that I point downhill, not uphill here because it becomes a catch situation, and that I'm pushing into the corner towards my left to form a dovetail. I don't need to go exceedingly deep, but I do need to go deep enough for sufficient grip that when I expand, I'm not going to burst the wood. And it's not the most comfortable cut. I am working above the tailstock, but there's no other way of undercutting this really clean under great control. Ensure it is dovetailed, the face is clean, and there is no bits of wood left in the corner, even dust. It must be sharp into the corner, otherwise the jaws are not going to sit as tight as we want. We'll get a little bit of extra flex and vibration if that's the case. So here I'm ready to reverse the block. and therefore I'll keep my tailstock there whilst I'm taking it down to the round so I do the initial shaping. Taking the clean cut recess, ensuring this doesn't restrict or hit in the middle anywhere, I can now put the blank onto the chuck. And then fully tighten, then bring up my tailstock to ensure I've got double security, because with the tailstock there, that's going to give me additional security, because it is possible you've got a chuck that goes the opposite way, or simply you tighten down onto the waist in the middle instead of expanding. And this will ensure that if anything goes wrong, the block is not going to go airborne. Now that I'm secure on the chuck, tightened it, and I brought my tailstock up, I can take my speed above 1,000 revolutions per minute and still be safe. I still have to take into consideration the diameter and also maybe any imbalance. Possibly there's some sapwood or bark on one side that's going to either add or subtract weight, creating imbalance. And as you can see, need to check that it does clear completely. So here we can see we cleared the true rest completely. We have it parallel. Setting my height, I'm now going to take the piece down to the round, shape it, and then show how I put a tenon on the base that's a large tenon that I don't need to chamfer on the bottom to keep it strong. On a larger tenon, it can be just the full length with no taper other than the taper that matches the jaws. Now that I've removed the tailstock, I'm checking again that everything is tight, because I'm no longer going to use the tailstock, because it will be in the way as I form the main shape of the bowl. So ensuring we're good to go. Then I can change my true rest position to be on the side. Can level off the base, put on some basic shape, form my tenon. So I cut the tenon in easily because the wings of this gouge are straight. It's a 40-40 gouge, so it's got less than 90 degrees, allowing me to undercut the shoulder and undercut the tenon. So it was just a roll in from the base. Remember not to come in from this direction or we'd be cutting into end grain. It came in from the base, formed the shape. I have good shoulder contact, good tenon grip. I do not need to chamfer this size tenon. This size tenon is too large to snap off and remain in the chuck. If anything was to go wrong and it was to come off the lathe, then this tenon will remain on this bowl and go with it. Not that we ever wanted to come off the lathe, but this is a much stronger tenon, even though it's full length, because of the distance between here and here is so much greater. Now I'll just do the final cut around the outside of the bowl, remembering that this tenon would be changed somewhat after jam chucking, either removed or formed as part of the shape.